I got teary just now. Sometimes I can talk about him for an hour and not shed a tear, and sometimes a flood of emotion comes. Andreas and I decided that we wanted to have children, and I got pregnant with them on our first try. And the very day I found out I was pregnant, I was on the subway when I believed that the Lord spoke a name to me, which was actually my daughter's name. So that's a whole interesting story altogether. No, but I was sure that he was a girl for the first 18 weeks. So I actually wept when I found out that I was expecting a boy. God is funny. Anyway, the pregnancy was completely normal. I was actually 41 weeks and had just had a checkup with the midwife. And 2 days after my checkup where everything was fine, I was getting ready for bed and reflected back over the day and thought that I hadn't felt Levi cake all day. So we called the hospital and went in to find out that his heart had just stopped beating. There was no explanation. They never found any, there were a few small things that could happen for any normally born baby, but no actual cause of death. And I was told there that evening at the hospital that I was to give birth to him vaginally, which I screamed in response to that. I was really angry that I didn't want to go through all that pain and all that when I had all the other pain to do it. But they said it was the best thing for my body to do. And now in retrospect, I am super grateful that they made me do that. The labor, because it didn't happen naturally and because there wasn't the natural force of him trying to make his way out, took 36 hours or something. I guess it was a long process. And, but it was beautiful all the same. My best friend, Kathy, was there with Andreas and me, and we even laughed at times, which was a crazy blessing. But what was most beautiful was that in the middle of pushing, as he was coming out, I just kept hearing in my head this Swedish worship song that says, "The Lord is my strength and my song." I don't remember what song that's from at the moment, but I just kept singing in Swedish over and over. It was like my mantra, and I believed it to be 100% true, and I still do, that the Lord carried us through, physically through that. And even when I had found out, the second I found out that his heart had stopped beating, I asked everybody to leave the room, and Andreas and I sat there, and I said, "You're going to think I'm crazy. I know they just said he's dead, but we need to worship Jesus and pray that he'll work a miracle. And if he doesn't work a miracle and bring him back, then he's worthy of our praise anyway." So we turned on a worship song that's escaped me at the moment by Surell and just praise God in the midst of all of that. And I know you're going to ask for pieces of advice, and here comes one now. That as a believer, I believe that Satan very easily wants to turn us against God and wants us to be bitter and angry about our lives and over things that happen, and why me, and pity me, and everyone else has it easier than I do. Instantly thought, we're not going down the road to bitterness, because it's an ugly, ugly road, and it never leads anywhere good. So the Lord will receive glory and praise throughout this process, regardless of what happens. And that's one of the biggest tips I can give. Don't give Satan the chance to plant a root of bitterness in your lives. It happens very easily, and he's very sneaky and crafty. But it's crucial to receive healing and to go forward and to be joyful in life, even in the midst of chaos. But anyway, Levi was born, and that is the most difficult thing that Andreas or I have ever gone through, ever. And I would say though, a blessing for me, a blessing in disguise, was that because he'd been in the birth canal quite a while, his head felt really soft in the back. It didn't feel like it should naturally. So I sort of felt like I was holding an alien, and I don't say that to be harsh or cruel or this is my baby, but somehow that helped me to think he's not here, he's in heaven, and I'm just holding this shell, and it's not him. Because I had later read stories about people who took their dead babies home with them and went through this process at home of, and to each his own, but it was so much easier for me to say, you can take him and prepare him for burial because my child's with Jesus. He's not right here. So that was a blessing. But let's see. I was out of work I worked in psychiatry, so you have to be quite stable yourself. So I was out of work for maybe three months, I think. Thank God for Sweden and the system that works in that case. And the process we went through was just, it was scary and ugly and beautiful all at the same time. We stayed in the hospital a few days afterward, and I think one of the scariest things for me was feeling like I'm going to leave the hospital. All these people knew I was having a baby, and I'm not leaving the hospital with the baby, and people are going to ask questions, and people are going to see me and just think I'm really fat, or she has this baby weight, and where's the baby, and just, I just wanted to put a sign on me that's like, I had a baby, he's not here. I don't know, just leave me alone, don't ask questions. But that was stuff I had to deal with in my head that Andreas didn't have to deal with as much. And that was really hard. And I will say that one area we really struggled in, and this is another piece of advice I would give, is that he and I are completely different in how we express ourselves and how we deal with things and process things. I am 100% off the charts verbal, and I share everything hard on my sleeve. I have no filter. I should. And he keeps most things inside, and most of the time that works out quite well for us. But when you're going through a really serious hurting grieving process, I sometimes felt like he's not grieving, or he's not dealing with this, or he's not processing it because it was happening internally. And a wise mentor of mine suggested that I suggest to him that he just write down one sentence a day of what he was processing and what he was feeling. And sometimes he wrote a page, sometimes he wrote one sentence, but that gave confirmation to me that he was processing it, that he was dealing with it, that something was happening in here, because all of my happenings in here were coming out all over the world. Us vomited on everyone who would listen to them. No, but I know that can lead many couples who deal with a problem or a struggle or something, that can lead them in totally opposite directions. We had gone to a non-Christian counselor who said that she thought we should get this family counseling. This could lead to divorce and all these. No, you just have to talk about what you're going through and to be real and honest about it. And that's not easy at all, but just to keep dialogue open. So he had to make an effort to talk a bit more, and I had to make an effort to let him be in his space a bit more. But we went through days where all we did was cry. All I did was sleep and cry. And there were other days I felt semi-human and wanted to talk to people. It was just, I don't even know how to describe the process. One really hard thing that was coming home to Levi's room that we had decorated and prepared, and just seeing an empty bassinet and knowing there was no baby going in it. But a mom who had flown in just an hour after Levi was born suggested that we turn Levi's room into a prayer room, which was brilliant. So we put mats out all over the floor and pillows out all over the floor, and put some speakers in there and played. I went in there and wept and cried and had a journal in there and played worship music and had construction paper and markers, and I would write quotes from songs that spoke to me or Bible verses that spoke to me, and I pasted them all over the walls, and I had a big map, and there were friends, pins of friends who were all over the world that I could pray for, and tried to think about there's still other people in my life around the world, not even in my life, who are going through things much worse than this, who still need prayer, so trying to get the focus off myself. But one specific day, it was 2 weeks on the day after Levi died, I got up really early in the morning. I went in there, and I had it quiet and dark with candles. January in Sweden is just dark. But I remember I screamed at God and threw pillows across the room and screamed out things like, how could you let this happen? Or why did you do this to me? Or why me, and why not somebody who doesn't even like babies who's pregnant? Or it's all kinds of the things that you say in the throes of desperation. But at the same time, I was journaling and screaming and throwing and was multitasking. And I have never felt God's presence closer, actually grasping me or holding me tightly than I did during that session, or whatever you want to call it, when I was just in there. And it reminded me of the Psalm. I'm bad with remembering what numbers, but there's a psalm that says, where can I go to flee from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? And as a believer, there is nowhere. It doesn't matter how far I run, or how much I question, or how angry I get, or how much I disappoint or hurt God. He is still there and as close as he's ever been. It's just a matter of me going back to him. And it was the most raw, I think, beautiful moment I've ever had with God. And there are times that I have craved that nearness. And I spoke with, was it last Christmas, with my mom about Levi's death, and she was having a much harder time processing it, because she said she's dealing with the hurt that I, as her daughter, have experienced, along with losing her first grandchild and such. And she said, how can you be as happy and as at peace and as joyful as you are about all of it and not dwell on it or focus on it? And I said, I think because I've really come to a point that I believe that I think for most people in many places in life, to read the Psalms and hear about David and crying out to the Lord in desperation, you just sort of skim over it, and you think you feel desperate when you're not sure what your next move is at work, or you're desperate when you haven't slept in a month, or whatever, you don't have enough money to pay your bills. But I reached just such a raw place of desperation where I felt like I don't know how to breathe without God. Physically, I don't know how to breathe without his strength inside me. And I felt this connection to so many of the Psalms, and reflecting back afterward, there are so many times that I've longed for that nearness to God. And I think when you're in just the routine of everyday life, whether it's taking care of kids at home, whether it's going to your job or going to school or whatever you're doing, just the day-to-day humdrum and your to-do list of grocery shopping or ironing your clothes or washing or whatever it happens to be, it's so easy that God just sort of gets put into the midst of everything that you're doing, or put onto the side altogether, and that he's not necessarily your reason for moving or being, just your purpose in general. And that's what he became in the midst of all of that. I mean, he had been my passion and my purpose, the reason I came to Sweden, but it's just became a completely different thing. So that when my mom and I had this conversation, I said, I've come to a place where I believe, and it is really hard to say, but that I believe that it was worth us losing Levi, and I think Andreas can say the same thing. It was worth losing Levi to know God on that level. And it doesn't make sense to say it's worth somebody dying, especially not your baby, but I think that's a place that God wants all of us to be in. Not that we have to experience death or losing somebody, but that to be in such a place of needing and wanting him more than anything else, that he becomes more important than the TV show that we're watching or the friends that we're hanging out with or whatever our plans are, that he is the core of everything, that's what he longs to be. And the Bible does say he's a jealous God, and he is, and rightfully so. He created us, and we were created to praise him, and that's why we exist. And so when we end up doing all these other things, not that they're bad things, but that they just take up space, it steals away from him. And I have longed many, many, many times since the days and weeks after Levi's death for that nearness and oneness with God. And it's worth it. It's to know God and to know that he is the air I breathe, as the song says, or this old song was, you are my all in all. Yes, that's what he wants to be. And even now, it's easy for me to get caught up in the day-to-day things of 2 kids or wiping poop, or just things happen, and finding 5 minutes to hang out with God and read his word is like, oh, just deal with it later. I just need a break. But that's what he wants, and that's the core of everything. So yeah, that's the place I have come to through a very, very difficult, hard process. And I didn't go into so much detail about Levi's birth, but I was like, you don't need to know all the gory details. But I think the other thing, too, that one of my best friends from university talked with me about shortly after Levi died, that she had thought a lot about since then, was that it's so crucially important as a believer to know God in times of peace, to walk with him through peace, through the humdrum of daily life, so that when crisis hits, whatever the crisis is, whether it's you're in Texas and your world is turned upside down because of a flood, or you lose a baby, or whatever it is, but that when that crisis hits, that he is the natural rock that you lean on and you turn to, and not that you just call out to him in times of desperation. Because when you know who he is in times of peace, when you know that he is a good and faithful and trustworthy God who will not let you down, when you can say that in an open conversation, logically, through your faith, then when the crisis comes, it's not foreign or scary or, to trust in God. It's just the natural thing to do. And I thought, of course, God is still good. Of course, he is worthy of our praise. He is the reason he's going to receive glory through all this. That's the goal. And that's why we created our website, Levi's Legacy, because we want his legacy to be that God gets glory, whatever happens in life. It's about him, and he's the reason we live. Yeah.
Wow.
Can we pause?